Hey guys, we're going to cover 2.11 in your notes. So make sure you get your spirals ready. We are going to be talking about the difference between forced and voluntary migration. All right, here we go. Get ready to set up your notes. And if you need to pause the video, go ahead and do that. But it is standard 2.11, which is forced and voluntary migration. Over to the side, you're going to have a handout today that is going to be the migration transition model. So make sure you put that on the back of the notes that you take today. Historic migration, migration obstacles as they apply to ESPN, forced, and then voluntary. Okay, here we go. All right, this first slide is going to be the Zelensky migration model, and you should have a hard copy of that to paste on the back of your note pages. This is kind of cool because it is basically migration patterns that applies to the DTM. So you already know what's going on in the 4 stages of the DTM, okay? So there's actually a movement that's happening in each of those stages as well with migration. So in stage 1, remember you have that high CBR and high CDR, right? And what people are generally dying of is, like famine and disease. So what's happening in that migration transition is you have people moving in search of food. Okay, so they're going to be nomadic. Now in stage 2, again, where you see that high crude birth rate, still really high, but you have a declining death rate because of medical revolution. How people are moving in stage 2 is they're moving within the same region. But most people are moving from those rural areas to the urban areas. So from the countrysides to the city. Then when we get into stages 3 and 4, right, we see that crude birth rate coming down, and we also see the crude death rate coming down because people have had that cultural shift, not having as many children anymore. Now, what's going on in migration in those stages is you have a high international immigration, so people leaving countries and coming to other countries. But you also still have an interregional migration from people going from the cities now into the suburbs. Okay, and you also see that same pattern in stage 4. All right, that's Zelensky's migration model. All right, digging into historic migration, that you first want to note colonization was migration. So when you have Europeans colonizing the rest of the world, that is migration, okay? So you have Spain, Portugal, Great Britain, France. They're spreading their influences. They're spreading those languages and spreading their religion to different parts of the world, okay? Both in the Western Hemisphere and the Eastern Hemisphere. They also spread disease. This wiped out indigenous people, and their cultures were replaced. You don't see quite as much of that happening in the Eastern Hemisphere during colonialization because a lot of those cultures ended up being more mixed. Okay. All right. Another historical migration trend is you want to take note of the Atlantic slave trade. That's where you had 12.5 million Africans that were shipped across the Atlantic Ocean into parts of North America, the Caribbean, and also South America. Okay. So that's going to be definitely forced migration. Another historic migration is where we have some reversing trends. For example, what you're seeing a lot happen today in Europe, when people were leaving Europe to colonize the rest of the world, you see that reverse today. Lots of people leaving Africa and parts of the Middle East and going into Europe because they're escaping civil wars, poverty, a number of things. Be familiar with the chain migration. Okay, chain migration is when you have people move to communities where relatives or friends have recently migrated. And so you might have an uncle that is located in a place, and then you might have the sister come next, and then that follows with nieces and nephews. So that is going to be chain migration. Also know ethnic enclaves. So when you have chain migration increasing in large streams, the results are actual neighborhoods that are filled primarily with the same people or the same ethnic group. Okay. So for example, you have heard of Little Italy or Chinatown. Those are going to be ethnic enclaves. Okay, where these almost little mini communities are developing of the people of the same ethnic group. Okay. Please be familiar with U.S. waves. Okay, these are the four main waves of immigration patterns that came into the United States. That first wave is going to be colonialism, okay, when people were leaving Great Britain and coming into the Americas to settle. That would also include the American slave trade, okay? And again, that's the second wave, is enslaved Africans. That third wave is going to be more from people from Northern and Western Europe. So examples over to the side, you can see in the 1840s and 50s, you had the Irish that was leaving Ireland because they were escaping economic conditions, but you also saw Germans escaping political conditions. Then once you had that Industrial Revolution, that drew others, Germans, Irish, and Scandinavians came. And then early 1900s, you see more of Italians, Russians, Austrian, Hungarians, and they were coming to America to look for a fortune. Now, after the main world wars, you start to see a shift of people, not so much from Europe anymore, but from Latin America and Asia. Okay, so that's going to be your fourth wave. This is kind of a cool chart that shows you those four main waves, and you can see over to the side where most people were coming from. So the first three waves, you see mostly people coming from Europe, but then in that last wave, right, you see a lot of Asia, you see Caribbean, Mexico, so those Latin American countries. Right. Now let's talk quickly about migration obstacles. You need to give some examples of how migration obstacles can be economic, social, political, or environmental. Okay. So the first is economic obstacles. So when people are migrating, it costs money. And so they have to have transportation, and that's going to cost. If they're leaving a place, they have what's closing up costs. So if they have to sell things or put their house on the market, then also when they come into their new destination, they have opening up costs. So might need to put down payment on deposits on a new apartment. They will also have visa fees, which can be very costly, hundreds of dollars actually. So those are all examples of economic obstacles in migration. Social obstacles are going to revolve more around attitudes and concerns. So we have this word here again, xenophobia, which is a fear of people of different culture. So cultural obstacles can also go beyond just attitudes. They can also just serve as barriers, right? So if you're going into a new country with a language that you do not speak, that is going to be a barrier. This can also occur with any kind of cultural norm, including religion. All right, and then political obstacles are going to mostly point to things like quota. Remember, quota is where a country has a limit of how many immigrants they will take a year. And then you also have borders like unauthorized immigration, and I have a picture there, an example of the US-Mexican border. Okay, and then the last is going to be environmental obstacles. These are going to be mostly based on distance and landscape. So things like deserts, mountain ranges, and even seas can be an obstacle for people migrating. An example there, very sad, is a little boy that was from Syria. It actually went viral several years ago when the Syrians are leaving Syria to escape their civil war. They are crossing the Mediterranean Sea to get to the coast of Greece usually, and they will sometimes triple the normal capacity for some of these boats. Many of them go down, and many people drown in the Mediterranean Sea if the Coast Guards do not get there in time. And unfortunately, this was the result of a lot of children drowning. Very sad. All right, and just be familiar with examples of forced and voluntary migration and be able to probably list some specific examples of those. So when you have forced migration, it's usually going to be the result of a war, exile, persecution of something, loss of freedoms, or even slavery. And then obviously voluntary migration is going to be more choice motivated, and it's going to revolve around economics and jobs, and could be a change of lifestyle. All right, types of forced migration. These are mostly just like terms, like vocab terms. Obviously, slavery. Then asylum seeker, somebody that is seeking a safe place, is an asylum seeker. Please know the difference between international or internally displaced persons and refugees. So note this in your note. In IDP, internally is they're staying within a country, so they're not crossing an international like border, as opposed to a refugee is crossing an international border. Two pictures down here are examples. There on the left is Hurricane Katrina. Those are internally displaced people. They did not leave the United States. They did flee New Orleans, and that's just a picture of the Superdome in New Orleans, where many of them were sheltered after the hurricane. And then over to the right is Rwandan refugees escaping ethnic cleansing war in Rwanda during the 1990s. They did cross country lines, so that's why they're called refugees. All right. And then this last slide is going to just be types of voluntary migration. I would just write these down. Most of them are just kind of vocabulary words. I'll go through them really quickly. Transnational is just like it sounds. If you are crossing international borders, you are transnational migration. Then there is transhumans, which is an interesting term. This usually relates to herd animals. And so when people are nomadic and they're following the herds, that is going to be a transhumanist form of migration. Then internal migration is just like it sounds. You are migrating within a country or a state or a nation. And then chain migration, we've already talked about. That's where a destination of friends and families are migrated. So Uncle Bill is going to go where other family members might be already. And then step migration is just like it sounds. And a lot of people that are migrating long distances will do it in steps. So they might eventually reach their destination through many series of steps to small cities or communities. Then guest worker is where you have a lot of migrants coming up to maybe just work during a season. A lot of them are around agriculture. So if you have a season of a crop for a short time, lots of migrants come in, get a work visa, and stay to pick that crop for the season and then return to their home country. The last is rural to urban, and that's just a repetitive pattern that you're going to see with migration, people leaving rural areas and going to the cities. All right, guys, that's it. We'll catch 2.12 next time I see you. All right, have a great day. Bye.